Right, good evening, and in the fourth part of this series of struggles for the Holy Land, we're going to talk about King Trump and the return to Zion. And I got found out, snappy title on the assumption that it would attract the masses, but I am going to talk about President Trump, so hang on. Okay, but I'm not going to start with him. I'm going to start off with this cylinder, which is a 20 by 10 centimeter cylinder made out of clay called the Cyrus cylinder. It goes back to the 6th century BCE, and the clue is in the title, the Cyrus cylinder. So it's, I wouldn't say it was written by King Cyrus, but it refers to the majesties of King Cyrus and everything that he did. And it was written in cuneiform script, which was an ancient script popular in Mesopotamia in those times. And the text refers to a lot about King Cyrus, obviously his great battles, and it also refers to the restoration and repatriation of deported people, which gave this cylinder a unique role in protection of human rights, despite the fact that most scholars think that that this text refers to restoration of cult sanctuaries of the Persians, and not so much to the religious rights of other peoples. Nonetheless, in stark contrast to the Assyrians and the Babylonians that came before the Persians, whose policy was to deport conquered peoples, the Persians do seem to have been more open to leaving people in their native lands, provided that they paid homage to their Persian peers. Anyway, the cylinder gained, it was discovered, I can't remember what I mentioned this, it was discovered in the 19th century, of course, by British explorers who brought it back to the British Museum, where if you want to see anything decent, you have to look in the Louvre, the British Museum, or in some of the museums in New York as well. But anyway, the cylinder gained prominence in the late 1960s when the last Shah of Iran called it the world's first charter of human rights. He was a great, as we know now, he was a great protector of human rights. I mean that somewhat sarcastically. And in 1971, his sister, Princess Ashraf Pahlavi, she presented the United Nations Secretary General U Thant with a replica of the cylinder. And if you go to the United Nations building, on the second floor of the building, you can see a replica of the cylinder to this day. So who was this Cyrus? Cyrus lived between 600 and 530 BCE. And after he conquered the Babylonians, okay, shortly after Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem, set fire to the temple and exiled the Jews of Judea to Babylon. But Cyrus ruled an enormous empire that included the Near East, Southwest and Central Asia, and also the Caucasus. Cyrus is our friend, okay? Our scriptures remember Cyrus fondly. Cyrus is referred to in Divrei Hayamim. The Lord God of the heaven has given me all the kingdoms of earth. He's appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people amongst you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. That's a reference to Cyrus in Divrei Hayamim. And in the book of Isaiah, it also refers to Cyrus. God chooses Cyrus to subdue nations before him, to strip kings of their armor, so that you may know I am the Lord, the God of Israel. Okay, so Isaiah is suggesting that actually God is behind what Cyrus is doing. But the first century historian Josephus, who lived much later, he lived in, as I said, in the 1st century AD, he, in his book, The Antiquities of the Jew, he also credits Cyrus with freeing Jews from captivity. And seemingly in 538, this cylinder of Cyrus was the decree, was the trigger that allowed Jews to leave the exile in Babylon and go back to Judah. Mike Evans, who I don't know personally, but I think he is an evangelical American, he told the Christian Broadcasting Network that Cyrus was used as an instrument of God for deliverance in the Bible. And God has used this imperfect vessel, this flawed human. Cyrus was very, very flawed and very imperfect. This flawed human being like you or I, this imperfect vessel, and he is using him in an incredible and amazing way to fulfill his plans and purposes. Okay, so who does this remind us of? This, of course, King Cyrus reminds us of the good King Donald. And in 2018, the following statement was made about Donald Trump. I want to tell you that the Jewish people have a long memory, so we remember the proclamation of the great King Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, 2,500 years ago. He proclaimed that the Jewish exiles in Babylon will come back and rebuild our temple in Jerusalem. We remember 100 years ago, Lord Balfour, who issued the Balfour Proclamation, recognized the rights of the Jewish people in the ancestral homeland. We remember 70 years ago, President Harry Truman was the first leader to recognize the Jewish state. And we remember how a few weeks ago, President Donald J. Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Mr. President, this will be remembered by our people through the ages. 2018, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu. And in fact, after the embassy moved to Jerusalem, there was even a coin minted with on it, on one side, on the head side, the heads of King Cyrus and Donald J. Trump, and on the other side, a picture of the temple. It's not legal currency, but it was minted in Tel Aviv to celebrate the changing of the American embassy, the movement of the American embassy to Jerusalem. Okay, so let's. So when the Jews were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, the temple is destroyed, and the Jews solemnly trot off to exile. They don't really know how to act. How can, after hundreds and hundreds of years of having the temple, of everything being focused on temple worship, how are they going to live in Babylon? And to answer that question, they turn to the old prophet Jeremiah, who died about 15 years after the temple was destroyed. And he reminded them of the prophecy, I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all nations and places where I have banished you, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. So Jeremiah says, retain the faith in God, and God will redeem you. And here you see a picture of Jeremiah, painted by Michelangelo, and it's on the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. So this deliverance, this prophecy of Jeremiah, he died in 570, but in 538, Cyrus proclaims Jews can return to Yehud Medinata. Okay, it reminds us maybe of the state of Israel. They can return to Yehud, providing that they will be loyal subjects of the Persian Empire. And in 538 BCE, the first Aliyah is led by Sheshbatzar, who is a prince in the tribe of Yehuda. And the second Aliyah is led, they're basically the vanguard, and they're followed by Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was, he was thought to be a descendant of Melech David, so he had royal blood. He led 42,360 people. We know that because that's what's stated in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. We'll come on to them in a minute. And he led these 42,000 people back to Yehuda. The people that went back were obviously from the tribes of Yehuda, Binyamin, and they went back to a very, very poor state, a vassal state of the Persians, a state that was plagued by intermarriage. Not a lot of women went back, by the way, far more men. We know exactly who went back, again, because it's written in the book of Ezra. They were plagued by drought, civil war with the Samaritans, and of course, taxes they had to pay to the Persians. In 516, the second temple was rebuilt. The Persians allowed it to be rebuilt. We don't really know anything about this temple, but we do know that it was built from wood. It was a very simple structure, and the Persians allowed it. If there would be any attempt at rebellion, the Persians would simply set fire to the temple. In 458 BCE, Ezra led another 5,000 people from Babylon back to the land, back to Jerusalem, and he set forth somewhat of a religious reforms. So he sought to end intermarriage. He instituted the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and institutions that we have to this day. For example, the reading of the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays, that goes back to that period of Ezra. And then 7 years after Ezra, Nehemiah came. Nehemiah, as opposed to Ezra, who dealt with religious matters, Nehemiah, who was a civil servant in the Babylonian government, he set forth more administrative changes. He fortified, he built walls in Jerusalem, and he waged war against the Samaritans to end their persecution of the Jews that were in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. But the question that we have to ask ourselves, I'm not sure I have an answer, is, wow, look at it, 1,000, 42,000, 5,000, 50,000 people of the exiled people, 50,000 people went back. And that's really extraordinary, why so few people, you know, the temple has been destroyed barely 70 years ago, but only 50,000 people go back from Babylon to Jerusalem. And that's really extraordinary and asks a lot of questions. And if we parallel it to modern day return to Zion, to Jerusalem, well, when did modern day Aliyah start? Started in 1882 with the first Aliyah, who were mainly families from Russia. It lasted, the first Aliyah was 20 years, 25,000 people. And then we move on to, it was a lot of religious people and families. The conditions, as we know, were extremely hard. In the years of the second and third Aliyah, it was more, just one second. In the years of the second Aliyah and the third Aliyah, 75,000 people, these were socialists, they were pioneers, Ben Gurion, Borochov, A.B. Gordon, people that went up to the Galil, to the Jezreel Valley and wanted to till the land. The fourth Aliyah, the Grabski Aliyah, Grabski was not a Jew, Grabski is the Polish finance minister, and conditions in Poland became extremely hard. And a lot of Poles left and came to Palestine. I think this was around the time when, so I didn't mention why the numbers so low in the second and third Aliyah, whilst millions of Jews were actually leaving Eastern Europe, but of course they were all going to the promised land of America. The time of the fourth Aliyah, I think the gates of America started to close. So 65,000 people came, about half of them were Poles. It's worth mentioning that in 1920s, that also there was a lot of Yerida as well. So in 26 and 27, I think actually the numbers of one of those years was like the net Aliyah was 0. And I think in 1927, actually more people left than came. And then in 1929 to 1939, the much bigger Aliyah, 250,000 Jews leaving, fleeing from Hitler, a large number of those coming from Germany, 1934 to 1948. The illegal Aliyah, the Mapilim, so the Jews that were smuggled in under the noses of the British, despite it being prohibited for these Jews to actually come into Palestine. And of course, again, you know, there's all kinds of reasons, but you know, low numbers of Jews actually making Aliyah, certainly until the time of the fifth Aliyah, and until the time of, until post-Holocaust, when the numbers of Jews increased massively, both from deportation camps in Europe, and of course, at the establishment of the State of Israel, hundreds of thousands of Jews fleeing from the Arab states. So Shavei Zion, so I referred to the Jews that left Babylon as Shavei Zion. So there is a Moshav Shavei Zion, which is just outside Nahariya. When was it established? It was established in 1938 by 200 Jews that fled from Rexingen in Germany. And on April the 13th, 1938, Shavei Zion was established as one of the 52 tower and stockade settlements that were established. There was a very unusual Ottoman law that was respected by the British, which was that if a settlement was established, if there was a roof on, it couldn't be removed. And basically overnight, in 1938, 1939, 52 settlements of this type were established, including Shavei Tzion. And in the picture, you can actually see a Sefer Torah that was rescued from Germany. It was rescued on Kristallnacht. And on the wall, you can see these are the victims of Rexingen. These are the names of the Jews that weren't so fortunate as the 200 that came and established Shavei Tzion. These are the names of the Jews of Rexingen that were lost in the Holocaust. And finally, a little video on Aliyah. We saw the first half of this video. This is from the program Lul, which was very popular between 1970 and 73, I think, in Israel. We saw the first half of this, so this is the second half of this.
Nous sommes à Israël. מתחף סקרמפר. עכשיו זה מדינה שלנו. זה דגל שלנו. מה שאתה רוצה שלנו. ז'וז'ו, ז'קלין, viens ici. Nous sommes à Israël.
Na, Fritzi, was sagst du denn? Marokkaner.
עכשיו יהיה סקנדלים וסקנדלים כל יום.
Ja, keine Tarbut, keine Nimbus.
הנה אלדין ובורי לג'אבום.
Ташвили, Тюкашвили, Мирашвили, Забташвили. Ах, אנחנו בישראל.
אך, אין קג"ב. אין KVD.
חיות בוברת חמדת אבות תתגשם. תפסיקו עם השירה הזאת. אתם חושבים שאם תשירו תקבלו פה טלוויזיה בלי מכס?
רגרד גרמפר, רגרד לגרוזין, לכל אלה עולים חדשים מרוסיה.
56.
בטח. עכשיו יקבלו מספר לבן, סיכון לזוגות צעירים, מה שאתה רק רוצה. אנחנו פה הקמנו המדינה, אנחנו סבלנו, אתם לא מתביישים אתם? עדין בבורי לז'בקו. תתביישו.
ומה יהיה איתי? שאתה לא היית?
אנחנו פה ישבנו במעברות. אנחנו פה ייבשנו ביצות, שפכנו דם קנטון.
Das ist ein Skandal. Das war große Schweinerei.
אנחנו פה בארץ נתנו קצת בוותיקים, יא?
בדיוק, ובלארציה מה קיבלנו?
יא? אנחנו פה אכלנו, דרק אכלנו, יא? דרק מתליבה.
מתליבה.
יא?
מספר לבן, טלוויזיה, שיכון צעירים.
מה זה פה? Das ist doch eine Schweinerei, oder weiter noch einmal?
אתם עושים פה ברדק מישראל. עזוב.
אנחנו היינו סיירים בוולוג'ה! אנחנו היינו סיירים בוולוג'ה! ובבאקה אל-גרבייה!
וגם באוג'ה אל-חפיר!
יא! הניל, das ist... איפה אתה? היית ב-67! איפה אתה היית ב-47? איפה אתה היית ב-48? איפה היית ב-32? איפה היית ב-28? איפה היית ב-14? איפה היית? תתביישו! אבל אנחנו סבלנו פה 40 שנה במעברות! מספר כחול! טלוויזיה! ראית זאת? אנחנו בנינו המדינה וזה בא... תתביישו! מה זה כאן?